Okay, well, we left off last class looking at Philippians chapter 4, down at verse 4, and we said there's four things that we need in order to have peace in our life. And this concept of having peace, having joy, is something that we're going to look at through the next several verses. But Philippians 4, verse 4 through 7 points out four things. Then when we get to verse 8, we'll see a whole slew of other things as well. It's another way of looking at the same topic of having peace. And so he says, "Rejoice in the Lord always. Again, I will say rejoice," down in verse 4. And this, as we've said throughout the class, is kind of the trademark of this book. This book is a book of joy. And it's not the kind of joy that Hallmark cards point out, which is another important point. As you look at the joy that God offers, it is not a fluffy, Care Bear kind of joy that you can only have when things are already going well. This is the kind of joy that you can have deep within you so that regardless of what's happening in life, you have this stabilizing peace and contentment to your existence. So that through the darkest of times, you can still say, I will get through this and the Lord will take care of me. Remember the 23rd Psalm? What is it that David wrote there? Through the valley of the shadow of death, I shall fear no evil. And so that's the idea. No matter how deep the valley is, we can have peace, we can have joy. And Paul really exemplifies this because as he writes Philippians, he writes it from prison. He's not writing it from some hilltop where the sun is shining and the birds are chirping and everything's wonderful. He writes it from a jail cell. He writes it from imprisonment. And so in verse 4, he says, I want you to rejoice in the Lord always. Again, I'll say rejoice. Now, this is something we need to really consider, is there is a type of rejoicing that you can have in your life regardless of what you're going through. And I have up here Matthew 28:6, where it says, "He is not here, for He is risen, even as He said." Come see the place where the Lord lay. This is what was said when the disciples came and they saw that empty tomb. That is a joyous moment. It is a moment in the lives of every faithful person to God that we should mark down and never forget. Because regardless of what you're going through in life, you can remember one thing: He is risen. So today may be difficult, tomorrow may be very, very hard, but there will come a day where you'll close your eyes forever and you'll go to meet your God. So you can always rejoice. There's always something positive in the life of a Christian. We have a hope that does not disappoint. And so he's been pointing that out throughout this book. So we won't spend as much time on it now because really the whole book has been on that concept of there is always something good to see. Remember how he said in the very first chapter, he says to live is Christ and to die is gain. If I live, I can do Christ's work. If I die, I gain paradise. The next thing, in the next verse there, in verse 5, he says, "Let your gentleness be known to all men, the Lord is at hand." This idea of being gentle is something you see throughout the Scriptures. And especially as we've been going through the Proverbs Sunday morning, and Lowell's been looking at those, how many Proverbs are there that talks about the man that is always striving with others? He's always fighting. He's the violent man. He's the quarreler. Throughout the Proverbs, it points out if a man is prone to anger or he's prone to snap judgments where he just says things and doesn't think about it, he lets his emotions control him, he wears his emotions on his sleeve, that man's life is going to be a troubled life. It's going to be an unhappy life. Because in the moment, he'll say whatever he's thinking right then and there. He'll shoot from the hip. And then inevitably, when you shoot from the hip, you tend to hit things you didn't mean to hit. And so his life is not well aimed. And so here in Philippians, it says, let's be the opposite. I want you to be gentle. Now, throughout the Scriptures, it talks about the idea that there is a time for everything. If if you see a brother or sister living a sinful life, they've slipped back into sin, that is not the time to say, well, don't worry about it, no big deal, I won't say anything to them. Now, that would be gentle, wouldn't it? If you saw your brother or sister sinning and you just said, well, I'm just not even going to say anything to them at all. That would be gentle, but it would be the wrong kind of gentle. It would be too gentle because you wouldn't be taking care of the other things that the Scriptures teach in terms of trying to save one another and encourage one another and stimulate one another to good works so that we don't fall back into sin and lose our salvation. But Paul told Timothy, he says, the Lord's servant must not strive. He must not be a quarreler, but be gentle towards all, apt to teach and forbearing. That's the idea that we're talking about. When we become the kind of people who are as gentle as we can be, especially in difficult situations. That's the key. It's easy to be gentle when everybody's getting along. Oh, things are fine and everybody's happy and you're having a good, happy conversation. That's easy to be gentle. But what if you're talking to somebody and you disagree? So here it is, we're talking about something and I feel very strongly that I'm right and you feel very strongly that you're right, and we're now having a discussion. That's where gentleness is tested. And that's where Paul told Timothy. He says, if you're going to be the Lord's servant, you need to be gentle towards all people. Not just your buddies, not just the people that agree with you, but in all circumstances. That's the high and mighty call of Christianity. Everybody loves certain people. But when you can learn to love even your enemies, now you've begun to reach that Bible level of love. When everybody's gentle towards certain individuals, but when you can have somebody mean and ornery and angry at you, and you can still show gentleness with them, now you're beginning to hit that biblical level. And so many times, you find that your life is happier for it, because you're not the kind of person always getting into fights. And two, you make a greater impact on the world that way. If we were to count it up, I don't think there'd be any possible way to do it, but if we could somehow count up the amount of people who were converted to Christ because they had a coworker, or they had a relative, or they had a classmate who, when everybody else was shooting their mouth off, they didn't. If you could quantify the amount of people converted to Christ because they saw the example of a gentle person, I think it would shock us. I really do. Because that makes you stand out as being somebody who's different. And so Paul says, if you want to have joy, you want to have contentment and peace in your life, you've got to learn to forbear. You've got to learn to be patient, to be gentle. In the moment, it seems like a great idea to just really hammer somebody and lay them low. Boy, they disagree with me and I'll make them pay for it. In the moment, that seems like a great idea, a great way to be happy. But long term, it always has the same recourse. You're going to pay for those words. We've all said things in the heat of the moment that we spoke up, and then all of a sudden it was, I wish I could have taken that back. I wish I could have retracted those words. I wish I had said that in a more gentle way. The next thing he says in verse 6 is, be anxious for nothing, but in everything by prayer and supplication with thanksgiving let your requests be made known to God. So let's focus on that first part. Be anxious for nothing. Anxiety, well, I guess let me put it this way. How many people in America are on pills because they're anxious? I mean, how many people go to their doctor and they say, I'm going through this very difficult time in my life and this is happening and this is happening, and so the doctor says, let me give you some pills to take the edge off. How many Americans are that way? See, the statistics are coming more and more that Americans, as time goes on, we are medicating ourselves because we're anxious people. And we don't know how to deal with worry. We don't know how to deal with pain. And so here it is, we get in a tough spot like so many people are now, and you're out of work and you're wondering where the next paycheck's going to come from and how is it you're going to pay the bills, and You go to the doctor and you say, I'm anxious, and many Americans are going to their doctors right now because they're worried about the bills, and the doctors are saying, here's a pill, take this pill, it'll make you feel better. And that's how we're dealing with life. Well, Paul has a different way to take it. He says, what should you do? He says, be anxious for nothing, and then he's going to tell you what you need to do is to pray about it. It's to trust in the Lord. Christ had something to say about that on the Sermon on the Mount. He says, when you have the cares and the worries of am I going to have clothing, or are we going to have food? Christ points out and he says, look at the flowers. You just go out and look at a flower that's blooming. Where did that flower get its clothing? Now that flower is beautiful. It's arrayed. It's with a garment more beautiful than anything that any tailor could make for you. Where did it get that? The answer is God. God put that clothing on that flower. And then you go and you look at the birds. And the birds every day, they go out and they chirp and they sing every single day. Who's feeding those birds? God. And then Christ goes on to say, if God will take care of the birds, and if God takes care of the flower that is here today and then tomorrow is just mowed down, do you think He'll take care of you? So, here's an ingredient to a happy life. If you want to have a happy life, you've got to learn to do exactly what Christ said. Do not worry saying, what shall we eat? Or what shall we drink? Or what shall we wear? For after all these things the Gentiles seek, that is the nations, all mankind worries about these things. He says, for your heavenly Father knows that you need all these things. When we can begin to truly trust the Lord, that He does take care of us. David says he had been young and he'd been old, and there's one thing he'd just never seen. He said, I've never seen the Lord's people begging bread. They always get taken care of. Now, how do they get taken care of? That's the problem, isn't it? If I could tell you how the Lord will take care of your next need, you wouldn't need to trust in anything, would you? You could just say, well, I'll just go ask God and He'll tell me, and He's a prophet, and wouldn't that be nice if we could just do that? We could just be a bunch of prophets and just know ahead of time exactly how to work out. But if you could do that, it wouldn't be trust. So Paul says, something you're going to have to learn in order to have a happy life is to learn to trust God. Be anxious for nothing. Don't go around worrying about every little detail in life, because you can't control those things anyways. Christ had another way of talking about that topic. He said, when you worry about tomorrow, can you turn one hair on your head black or white that way? By worrying about things, can you change it? If I sit there for the next 6 hours and I worry about what am I going to eat for the next meal? What am I going to eat? What am I going to eat? Will that make the meal appear? The more I wring my hands and I worry about it, it doesn't make it appear anyways, does it? So God tells us, be anxious for nothing and learn to trust in Him. That's a whole lot easier said than done. I understand that. But it's also an ingredient to a happy life. Because when you no longer carry that burden of worrying about all those little details that the Lord's going to take care of anyways, see, really what you're doing is you're being redundant. That's what Matthew chapter 6 says you're doing when you worry. You're being redundant. Somebody else is already worrying about that. God is. So you worrying about it doesn't do any good because He's already got it taken care of. And so don't be redundant. You just go about your life and be happy, because the Lord tells us if we serve Him, we do what's right, He'll take care of those things. He will watch out for us. So if you want to have a happy life, be anxious for nothing. Then he points out the fourth thing, which is that we should be prayerful. He says, in everything, by prayer and supplication, with thanksgiving, let your requests be made known to God. Now this is an important point here that Paul is making, is it's not just being a prayerful people. But what type of prayer? There's a specific type of prayer that Paul says will make you a happy person. That if you'll pray to God with thanksgiving. the type of person that can learn to, every time they pray, you're going to pray to God, and there's going to be things that you want help with. There's going to be things that you want Him to take care of, concerns you have. Do that. When you have concerns, pray to God. Make those concerns known to Him. But do it with thanksgiving. If we can learn in everything that we do, in every prayer that we pray, to always count our blessings, we're going to be a happy people. Because this is the tendency of unhappy people. Unhappy people, you will find, they are the people that if you ask them how they're doing, what they heard is you asking the question, what's wrong with you today? That's what they heard. Unhappy people. You go and you say, hey, how you doing today, Joe? And if he's an unhappy person, what he heard is, please tell me everything wrong in your life. And you've run into people like this. Because you've asked them, hey, how you doing today? And then they start to tell you. And you realize maybe I didn't want to ask. Because they tell you this is wrong. And this is wrong. And I'm having this health problem. And I'm having this health problem. Now that's fine if it was one time. But there are certain people who will do that every time. Every single time you ask them how they're doing, all they hear is, tell me everything that's wrong in your life. Now the opposite is also true. There are happy people on this planet. And you know what happens when you talk to happy people? When you ask them, hey, how are you doing today? What immediately pops to their mind? Well, all the positive things that have happened in that day. Boy, you know, it's a great day. Sun is shining today, or it did at least for half an hour, and I got out in it. You know, they don't talk about the 23 and a half hours that it was raining. They say, you know, it was sunny for a half hour, and it was great. I got out to go and have a walk, and I really enjoyed that sun. And boy, I'm so glad I got to have that walk when it was sunny. And that's the way they think. They're always thankful people. And so God tells us, I want you to be a prayerful people. I don't want you to pretend that nothing ever goes wrong in your life and just act like everything's perfect when it's not. No, you live in a world with problems. But when you pray, I want you to do it gratefully. And so we begin to look at the scriptures on prayer, and like 1 Thessalonians 5:17 says, pray without ceasing. So how often should you pray? All the time. So then, if we should pray all the time, how often should we be thankful? All the time. Because how are you supposed to pray? With thanksgiving. You see how those two work hand in hand? The happy, rejoicing Christian is a person who is consistently going to God with their concerns. They don't ignore them. They don't try and handle them on their own. No, they consistently bring them to God, and they consistently count their blessings. That's the kind of person that's a happy person. And so you take these four things, and you just begin to bundle them up. You become a type of person who rejoices, who finds joy in life. You look at things and you can see the silver lining. You can find the positive in it. And you are a gentle person. You are the kind of person that people don't bristle around when they get around. People see you coming, they don't duck. But they enjoy your company. They want to be around you because they know that you're gentle, that even when you have something hard to say to them, you're going to say it as gently as you can. And you're the kind of person that trusts, and you're the kind of person that prays with thanksgiving. Guess what you're going to have if you have those four things? You have exactly what this whole book of Philippians is about. You're going to have joy. And so Paul says, if you look down after prayer, he says, down in verse 7, the peace of God, which surpasses all understanding, will guard your hearts and minds through Christ Jesus. Now here's the thing. I can guarantee you, you cannot appreciate how peaceful your life could be. You cannot begin to fathom how peaceful your life could be. It is beyond your understanding. It surpasses anything you understand. There is out there for us a life of so much peace, contentment, joy, that you can't fathom it. You're sitting here right now, and in the back of your mind, you have a list of problems, trials, concerns, a whole list of them that you're dealing with. You have on your shoulders a burden that's only yours. And nobody else here can take it off your shoulders. You are carrying that burden. And out in the world, everybody else is doing the same thing. They're walking around with weights on their shoulders just like you do, and it's weighing them down, and they are disheartened. You think of the word depression. How many people in America are depressed? See, there's another big thing. That's the same as talking about medicating people. How many people in America are depressed? Statistics show that more and more people are depressed in America every year. It's truly an epidemic. More and more people are getting to the point where they don't even want to get out of bed. They don't even want to look at themselves in the mirror. They don't. They cry, or many times when you're depressed, you've stopped crying. You just shut down. And doctors, they're trying to fix it. They recognize it's this huge problem, and if they could find a way to get rid of depression in America, can you imagine if a doctor could come up with a pill that would get rid of depression? See, if there was really a pill that would fix it, they'd have it. They'd be using it. They give you pills. You go to the doctor, they say, "Oh yeah, I'll give you an antidepressant." But is it really fixing it? No, depression is still a huge problem in America, isn't it? We haven't found the cure. 2,000 years ago, Paul wrote it down, though, and said, this is a cure. Rejoice, be gentle, be anxious for nothing, be a prayerful and thankful people. And when we begin to do that, you're going to get a peace that you didn't know was possible. You're going to stop fretting about every little small thing in life, because it's going to just actually be small now. That's the problem, isn't it? We take the small things in life and we worry about them because they're not small to us. They're huge. Well, this puts it in perspective. When we live according to God's laws, the small things become small again. And so I'm just laying out for you how big of a deal this is, this idea of having peace. Because it's a major problem we face as Americans. We want to be happy. And we are this huge, wealthy nation. And yet with all of our wealth and all of our health care, with all of our great research into the human mind, we're not happy people. Just across the board, Americans are not happy people. They're not peaceful people. They're sad, they're depressed, they're forlorn, they're withdrawn, and things are getting worse. Could it just be that we've moved away from the Bible way of living, and that if we go back to living the way the Lord intends for us to, that all of those problems would begin to work themselves out? See, this is what Paul says. You can have a joy that surpasses all understanding, a peace that surpasses all understanding when you begin to live the Bible way. Anybody have any comments or questions on those verses there? Yeah. Mm-hmm. No, you bring up a good point. Now, we need to clarify, are we saying it's always wrong to take any sort of medication? No, we're not. But what we are saying is, in America especially, and this is something, even the doctors are saying, is that instead of dealing with life, people are going and telling the doctors, deal with life for me. So there is a point where you can over-medicate, where we're now becoming so dependent upon the research and the health care that we're no longer living life. We're expecting every problem to be fixed by a pill. That's what I'm saying. So it's not, we want to be careful to say, we're not saying it's a sin to take this pill or that pill or something like that, but we are saying we have to be very careful to not get to a point in life where we're now saying the pill's the answer to living. Does that make sense? Where we can over-medicate ourselves instead of adjusting. You take the blood pressure, for example. There are blood pressure pills. But let's say you have a man who's 400 pounds and eats double quarter pounders for breakfast, lunch, dinner, and snacks in between. Is there anything wrong with taking a blood pressure pill? No. But if that guy's taking blood pressure pills and he's still living that lifestyle, there's a problem. And that's my point there as you look at it. Yeah, no, we definitely want to clarify. We're not saying it's wrong to take pills in certain circumstances, but we want to make sure that we're not letting that become a crutch that's keeping us from living according to God's standards. Does that clarify for you a little bit? Okay, yeah.
I just think it's like Israel when they would turn to idols instead of for their peace, they're given peace of mind when they could, instead of turning to God, just realize they would go to things that wouldn't help. They would go to people's world and go to God with realize.
Right. And I think we would all agree that there's a zillion different problems in America. There are health problems, there are economic problems, there's all sorts of issues that we deal with in America, and people say, oh, this is a solution, when really all it is maybe a stopgap momentarily, when the real solution would be go back to living according to how the Bible said to live. So, yeah, I think that's the real issue. So we can't pinpoint any one particular pill or one particular, well, it'd be the same thing as saying, you know, if somebody got up and they said, it's a sin to have a credit card. You could take it, move it over to the financial realm for a second. If I got up and I said, it's a sin to have a credit card. Well, no, that would be wrong. I don't think you can biblically say that. But can you get credit cards to the point where you're racking up the credit cards all the time to find happiness and you're buying more and more stuff when really what you ought to do is go back to living according to the Bible standards and be content with what you have? Yeah, so it's the same idea. We can't use physical things to fix who we are as people, because ultimately in the end, you know, we've got to use the Bible as our standard for living, and that's what will fix things. And so in America, we over-medicate, we get way too far in debt, we do all sorts of different things when the Bible says, no, there's a way to live that will fix 95% of those problems. Anybody else have any comments or questions? Yeah.
I think what it all comes down to is when you get rid of everything and you look right at it, it comes down to Hebrews 11:6. Faith is the bottom line. That's what he's talking about here. Just put your faith in God and everything, and it'll all work out. It will please God, and He'll help you, and He'll bless you.
Yep, absolutely. You know, so a life lived by faith will automatically remove a lot of problems by default. Yep, absolutely. And the Lord will absolutely bless you for it. So, okay. So now, want to make sure and get this in because it's a big verse, Philippians 4:8. In Philippians 4:8, we have this one verse that is so packed with things that it is hard to appreciate. And the whole point of this verse is the same as the verses before. If you want to have joy and contentment, this is how you get it. And he lists a whole bunch of different things, and he says, think on these things. Some verses say, translations say meditate, because that's what that word means. When it says consider or think on these things, it means to count them up, to calculate, regard, consider, ponder, think upon. It's not just the idea, we're going to list all these things, it's not just, oh yeah, that's something. It's to really begin to fill your mind with these things. Now, when I first became a Christian, I remember hearing a gentleman give a sermon, and he had grown up in just a really horrible environment, and had all sorts of things that he learned, sinful things that he learned, sinful things that he had seen growing up. And he said, you know, I have found one thing to be true, having lived that life growing up and then having turned to Christ and living a totally different life where I'm learning good things and I'm thinking about good things. He says, garbage in, garbage out. And that's really true. Whatever you put in, you will get out. Whatever you put into your mind, you will get out of your mind. Whatever you put into your body, you'll get out of your body. whatever you put into something is what you will reap. And that's what Galatians says, be not deceived. Whatever a man sows, so also he will reap. So here we're talking about the human mind, this unbelievably complex thing that we can't even begin to fathom. Here is God, and He has made your mind so much more complicated than the most powerful supercomputers you can imagine. And so much so that people dedicate their lives to understanding how people think and how to change thought patterns. And so here it is, people dedicate their whole lives, and every single one of them says the same thing in the end. It's so complicated we can't really understand it. We get a glimpse over here, a little bit here, but we just don't understand how the human brain works. In Philippians 4:8, Paul is going to tell us through God how your brain works. And what it really comes down to is garbage in, garbage out. Good things in, good things out. And so he lists the things that a healthy life puts into its mind. If you want to be a healthy person, these are the things you'll put in your mind. He says, whatever things are true. Now that word true is the word for truth. We talk about, we live in a world that tries to tell you there is no absolute truth. You know, everything's gray. There is no right, there is no wrong. Everybody should just do whatever feels right to them. And the more that we live in that world of there is no right, there is no wrong, and they tell you, if we'll just accept that there is no right, there is no wrong, just kind of do whatever feels good to you, then you'll be happy. But we've found the opposite to be true. The more we've removed absolute truth, the truth of God's Word, as John 14:6 says, Christ is truth. John 17:17 says, God's Word is truth. When we've removed the truth as our standard objective for how to live, have we gotten happier as a people or less happy? You look at America, we're not as happy as we once were. The more people remove morality, God's standards for how to live from our lives, the less happy we get. You know, people say, well, there's no proper way to run a marriage. There's no proper way for a married couple to treat one another. And so we took that. And what happened to the divorce rate? Did it go down when we said, oh, don't worry, just run your marriage however you feel like? No, it went up. When we started saying things like, well, you know, just live together before marriage. Then it'll give you a test run that way. And I remember that's the way that they really couched the whole thing. You know, marriage at all actually really isn't important. Let's not even talk about how to run a marriage. Just marriage itself isn't important. Just live together. And then what happened? Did people find that they were happier living together outside of marriage or not happy? See, when you remove absolute truth, you find that lives are less happy. So you take this book and you begin to meditate upon it. You begin to fill your mind with what God's standards for right and wrong are. And all of a sudden, you will find yourself living a happier life. Because when you do things God's way, it begins to work. Because you're designed in the image of God. You're made to function a certain way. And so it's just like somebody who goes out and they take a manual transmission vehicle and they don't know how to put the clutch on and switch gears. And so they go out there and they grind the gears. How long is that car going to last if you grind the gears between each? Not going to last long. That's what we're doing as human beings. We take, and instead of living by God's standard, we go out and we grind the gears. And then all of a sudden, you know, we get to 20 and we're hopeless, we're purposeless, and a lot of people in their teens and 20s are saying, I don't even want to live. They're contemplating and committing suicide. Why? Well, because we have had no truth. We haven't had any sort of goal and standard for how to live. And we've been grinding the gears and the transmission's absolutely destroyed. And so Paul says, meditate, consider God's truth. Whenever you look at life and how to live, think, what is the truth about it? And the truth will set us free. Next thing is, whatever is honest. This word honest here, it means dignified or grave. It means reverent. In both Titus and Timothy, it's given as the kind of behavior you would expect from a deacon, a deacon or an elder's wife, or Titus 2 says an older person. So when you think of an older, dignified person, somebody who has lived life and shown some maturity, that's what that word honest means. It means a reverent person, somebody who is dignified in their demeanor. That they live life with a certain level of self-control. He says, dwell on those things. Think about the people in your life that show dignity, because that's what you want to become like. Look around in the church and look at people in the church that you say, now that is a dignified person. There is somebody who has their life, well, we say they've got their life together. They've got their ducks in a row. Look at that kind of a person who's really put it all together, put all those pieces together, and I want you to think about that. Think about how they live and how they talk and how they behave towards others. And if you'll dwell on that, you're going to begin to be a happier person. Because people who have their lives put together, they have their lives put together not by chance, but they've done some things. They've made some specific choices that have put them in that position so that they are not easily ruffled. They're not quick to anger. They're patient. There's things that they do that have made them that way. And so that's what we want to be, is those kind of people that do that. Now, next thing he says, dwell upon the things that are just. That's the word for righteous. The things, we might say the things that people do that are the right thing. When people observe divine laws, that's just. When they do that which is good. You know, when you see somebody, well, it was just a couple of days ago, we saw, you know how it is, you'll have around town people who have furniture for free. And we saw one and go, man, that's great. So we couldn't get it in the car, but I thought I'd be able to fit in the car if there's nobody else there. So I got home, everybody got out of the car, and I folded all the seats down, and then I drove back, went to pick up this piece of furniture, and you know, it couldn't quite fit in my trunk. Just couldn't. If I could get it in the trunk, it would have been fine, but the opening just wasn't wide enough. Well, I'm over there, and I'm struggling with this thing, and then I hear a voice. Hey, you need a hand? And there's a guy across the street. A guy I didn't know or anything like that, and I said, yeah, I really could. And he helped me, and he saw, yeah, we can't fit this in here. And you know what he did? He said, well, I got a truck right here. You live close? We can just throw in my truck and bring it over. The guy didn't know me more than 30 seconds. Sure enough, he loaded his truck, followed me back to the house, helped me unload it in my garage. Really nice thing he did. He did a good thing. And it made me think, now, how often do I do things like that? See, that was a really nice thing. He just helped a perfect stranger. You know, I need to do more of that. See, when you dwell on those things, when we take that and we just really fill our minds with that sort of stuff, all of a sudden you begin to change who you are because you're dwelling upon good things. Now, you could take the opposite of that. How about you're driving on the road and somebody cuts you off on the freeway? Guy cuts you off, and how long did it take him to cut you off? 5 seconds or less. How long are you going to be upset about it? Oh, the rest of the trip. See, if you're not careful, you will dwell upon that which wasn't just. I can't believe that guy did it, and it ruins your whole day. This is what happy people do. They learn to dwell on that which is just, that which is good. They count the good things in this world. That which is pure. Something that is pure is something that is sacred. It's undefiled. It's like when you talk about clean and unclean meats of the Old Testament. These are things that are undefiled. James talks about which one? Let's see here. Hebrews 13 talks about let the marriage bed be undefiled. And in James 1, it just slipped my mind there for a second. James chapter 1, down to verse 27, it says, "Pure and undefiled religion before God and the Father is this, to visit orphans and widows in their trouble and to keep oneself unspotted from the world." There are some things that we can do that are just pure things. When people treat marriage with respect, that's a pure thing. That's what Hebrews 13:4 says. When you treat marriage in an honorable position, it's pure. You give it a position of being sacred, undefiled. That's a good thing. When you dwell upon those things in life that are just pure, I guess you could compare it to, right now you got Gus in that stage where he's small, and even when he does things that are wrong and we have to discipline him, it's not the same as when I do things that are wrong. He's just a little kid. He doesn't know any better. He just, he decides, I'm going to go over and grab this thing I'm not to grab. And he's just pure. He's totally innocent. When you sit there and you look at kids and you think about them and they do all sorts of funny things, that's pure. When you think about those things in life that are just good, pure things, you're going to be a happier person. When you look up and you see a rainbow in the sky and you think, that's God's promise to us. That's something sacred. It's something pure. It's undefiled. That's what Paul is talking about here. He says, dwell on those things that are lovely. You take something that is lovely, and that word lovely comes from two root words. One word that means near or close to, and the other means friendliness. It's where we get the verb phileo, like Philadelphia, brotherly love. It's a friendly love, an affectionate love. Dwell on the things that are lovely. And one of the great things that this congregation does is those envelope quilts. I just really appreciate the amount of work and time that people put into those things. And you look at that, and that is a lovely thing. It is something that kindles affection. People who get those, it just makes them feel good about human beings. It gives them some hope that not all humans are trouble. That's the idea. Dwell on the things that are lovely in life. Dwell on the things that are good that are going on in life. Dwell on the people that are a blessing in your life. Don't dwell on the garbage. Don't let your enemy be in your head all the time. Let your friends be in your head all the time. Count them up. Those things which are of good report. This is where we get the word euphemism from. It means things that sound good. When we talk about euphemism, it's a word that sounds like another word. That's where people have, somebody says, well, I won't swear, but they'll text OMG. They say, well, I'd never use the Lord's name in vain, but I'll say OMG in a text message, which what does that mean? Exact same thing. That's a euphemism. It sounds like it. It's basically the same thing. It's shorthand for it. There are things in life that sound good. They are of good report. Dwell upon those things. Don't get caught up in dirty jokes. Don't get caught up in filthy language or entertainment that is. It doesn't have It's going to have an entertainment value, but it's not. It doesn't sound good. It's bad for you. Dwell upon those things with virtue. Things of virtue, those are things of excellency. God tells us that we should add to our faith moral excellence, that we ought to be people who really strive to be morally excellent people, to go above and beyond doing that which is right. Then he says, dwell on those things worthy of praise. Whatever is praiseworthy. That is, when people do things that are good, tell them thank you. Think about that. Think about opportunities where you can see somebody do the right thing and tell them you're doing the right thing. Now, this is something we're all guilty of. When we see somebody doing the wrong thing, we're really quick to remember that. But then they do something right, and we just let that sail on by without a word said. So dwell on that which is praiseworthy. If you go through life and you are looking for opportunities to praise others, you're looking for things that are good that other human beings are doing, you're looking for the best in people, you will find yourself to be a happier person. And so as you look at that list of things, God says these are those things that if you'll dwell on them, you will have peace in your life. You will be somebody full of joy. Anybody have any comments or questions? Okay, then we'll shut down there and pick up next week.